Good day, everybody. This is your instructor, Kenneth Alvin Cinco, for the subject Psychology or General Psychology. So, may I remind everybody that this instructional material was created for your benefit. We know that the pandemic brings us a lot of adjustments on our schedule. That's why I have endeavored to create these instructional videos so that I can discuss personally to you our topics in psychology. So without further ado, we will start with our first lesson on the first module. So for module 1, of course, to give us uh, an overview of psychology so that we will not be um, shocked or confused or be confused on some of the terms, some of the basic or the fundamentals or the fundamental concepts in understanding our course. So we will discuss the overview. And what does the overview of psychology include? It includes brief history, the different perspectives, and also the methods that psychologists use in studying psychology or other topics which are related to the mind. So we will be discussing this lesson 1.1 today. May I just remind everybody that our outcomes would be number 1 to summarize and describe. So what we will be summarizing it is actually to briefly summarize psychology and its nature. So what could be the nature of psychology? If we talk about nature, we are actually talking about the characteristics of the subject, psychology. So we will be tackling that and also will be summarizing this uh, concept, no? And we will also categorize and compare, classifying and discussing the different perspectives in the academe. When we create knowledge, when we are creating knowledge, or when we know the way we know knowledge is actually systematic. It's not just you just it's not just like if somebody would like to create something out from nothing. It's not like that in the academy, especially in the school, no, in the university, and in your in the way you are schooling with your particular course. So you should know that when we create knowledge, there are steps. So for outcome number 2, we will look at the perspective. So what are these perspectives? These are the ways that we understand psychology. No? So I would like to present to you an example of an elephant. An elephant, the story of the blind men. No? Um, there were 7 blind men. I think that was 7 or 6. This is an anecdote actually. I don't know if you know this already, but this is how, no, academics arrive at truth. This is how the university and the researchers and the scientists arrive at truth. So, and the anecdote goes like this: there were 7 or many blind people, no? And these blind people, they were in one place. They bumped into something, no? These blind people bumped into something. It was large, no? When they touched it, because they're blind, they cannot see. When they touched the thing, they noticed that they described the thing, no, according to how they feel it, because they're touching the thing to describe it to the others. One blind person, let's call him blind number 1. Blind number 1 is saying that, oh, this thing is like a rope, no? It's a big rope. So that's the way he perceived the thing. However, blind person number 2 also said, "Oh my God, no! This thing is actually a wall. No, it's a wall because I'm hitting it with my head. There's a wall above. Then the blind person number three, we're describing, no, this thing is actually a post. This thing is actually a pillar. No, when you say pillar, it's a it's a post. No? And they were actually discussing among themselves. They were debating on what thing they were uh, they were tasked to touch and to describe. But actually, in reality, the thing was just an elephant. No, these blind people approached the elephant differently. The blind people number one is on the the head side where he can touch the trunk of the elephant. The other blind person is on the tummy side where his head is hitting the big tummy of the elephant, and the others were embracing. They were looking at the elephant in many different ways. So that analogy, if you will try to understand that analogy, is the analogy, no, when we talk about perspectives. In psychology, there is no one, no, there is no uh, one final approach in studying the human mind. So we will try to categorize and compare how these approaches differ and what are their uh, similarities. And for outcome number three, we will try to articulate. No? When we articulate, we'll try to enumerate and describe the scientific characteristic of psychology. You might ask, sir, if there are many different approaches to psychology, then why do we trust this? Because the study of psychology is actually scientific. When we talk about the scientificity of a subject, there is a followed, or academics follow certain steps, procedures, no? They carefully examine what they're studying at. So it's not just, random whatever that they're writing about. They tested this concept, they tested all these things in order to validate and in order to ascertain the ideas that are included in this uh, course. So those will be our outcomes. Now, before we go to the discussion, may I just present to you this person. So the person you're looking at right now is a real picture. No? Of course, it's real. You can see it. So it's a picture of a Nobel Prize winner. However, this person is also a schizophrenic. No, this person is a Nobel Prize winner. When we say Nobel Prize winner, it's one of the stalwarts, or it's the highest distinction or award that a scientist or a man of culture can receive. We have Nobel Prize for physics, we have Nobel Prize for economics, for literature, for other fields, no? And when they are recognized, it means that this is an international recognition. This is not just some local award, no? When you become a Nobel Prize winner, you are picked from a lot of different people who also are great in their fields, no? So I would like to introduce to you this person. This person is John Nash. His name is John Nash. Now, he's a mathematician and also an academic. He won the Nobel Prize for his discoveries in mathematics. However, he's also a schizophrenic. So, anybody of you know what is a schizophrenic? When we say schizophrenic, it's somebody with a serious mental disorder, no? In which people interpret reality abnormally. Now, I would just like for you to imagine how John Nash imagines the world. No, he when he walks, or he travels around the campus, the university where he's working at, he can see people that other people could not see. Okay, so um, that's why it's said that his interpretation of reality is abnormal, because when your mind is interpreting our reality in a normal way, you can just see persons who are real persons. However, a schizophrenic could have mental activities that are above normal. So with John Nash, he it's like his mind invents people, characters, all with very detailed backgrounds, no? His mind creates those and makes those reality. And when he walks in the university or in the places where he works, he sees and converses with these persons, no? So schizophrenia may result in some combination of hallucinations, delusions, and extremely disordered thinking and behavior that impairs daily functioning and can be disabling. You know what? Actually, there's a movie about this person. The movie depicts that he only had three, but in reality, there were a lot of people who were conversing with him in his mind. Those are the hallucinations and the delusions. No? Who among you here have experienced these hallucinations? One time, I had a problem. I was hungry. No, my stomach was aching, and I worked out. This is a story about me and hallucinations. No, I worked out on an empty stomach. So by that time, I was really a very large person. I mean, I weighed a lot. No, I think my weight back then was 70 kilos, 75. Today, my weight is around 67, around like that. So when I worked out, what happened was there was a sudden weakness that I felt in my body that pushed me to seek or look for a chair where I sat. No? When I sat in the chair, I looked above and I saw stars. I saw stars with a lot of color. If you can see this one, this star here, if you can see that star, where my mouse is pointing, those are the exact images. However, the images were just very colorful. No, they were rainbow in color. So there was flashing of stars there. So when you look at, that was the time that I told myself that, oh my gosh, when I watched Tom and Jerry when I was just a little boy, I was uh, very fascinated by the way the animators portray Tom and Jerry. No, when they usually do their slapstick moves, when they slap each other, when they punch each other, and then stars come out. No, it's like a very funny thing, but actually they have a basis on reality. That's the time when I was hallucinating those stars. That's the time that I realized that, oh my gosh, these hallucinations are for real. No, they are for real. You can really look at those star-shaped figures, and they're sparkling there in your eyes. And I was feeling weak that my mother was panicking, and she was going outside and calling our neighbors, no, for help. No? So that's the time that, oh my God, these hallucinations are for real. They are not just invented by somebody. When you encounter somebody who will say, "I'm hallucinating," please do not take it as something that they're fantasizing about, that they're just inventing. These things are for real. Your mind plays tricks on you. No, that's how also John Nash, no, was being played by his mind. There were people that they were conversing with. The people that were talking with him. were a child, there was his best friend, no? For a long time, there was a best friend in his mind that he really thought was real, was following him. And another one was that his mind invented an FBI agent who were following him wherever he goes, and that FBI agent always um, appear, no? Appear when the times were not very clear, no? So these hallucinations are what the Nobel Prize winner John Nash experienced. Actually, you can watch this movie. The movie was called A Beautiful Mind. It was a 2001 film, and I think it won awards. If not, if it didn't win awards from the Academy, uh, from uh, from the Academy, the Oscars. I think it was nominated for several times for director, for best picture. I I can't really ascertain what awards it received. Um, it's just that if you want to watch this film, I urge you to watch this. No, you imagine how, no, a person who is very technical, very intelligent, no? You're not intelligent if you didn't win a Nobel Prize, but John Nash, he won the Nobel Prize, meaning his mathematic concepts, the discoveries that he made were really significant in the field of study. However, he was having hallucinations, no? So there's a contrast, no, in perspective. So it begs us the question, are we really looking at things for real, or our perception not playing tricks, no, on us, that a person who is as brilliant as John Nash would win the Nobel Prize even though he had these hallucinations, right? So that's the beauty of the movie, no? It explored his life and his struggle, because it became a struggle with John Nash. No, he was very intelligent. All the professors in the university were looking up to him. Um, they were following his studies. However, he was diagnosed with this kind of disorder, mental disorder. So that's why it begs us to think that there are mysteries of the mind. No, it makes us think that why do these things happen? A seemingly intelligent person would be played by his own mind. Therefore, there is really that significance to study the mechanisms of the mind. So it also brings us the question: what does it say to the human mind? No? I don't know if you have some insights to this. Would you like to answer? So what does it say to the human mind? There are a lot of mechanisms that happens to the human mind that we don't know, and that we even would like to think that are part of our reality but is not. Huh? So it also begs us the question: how does the human brain work? So what things push the human mind to create these images, and how can we be familiar with the operations of the mind? These are some mysteries. There are also questions like, uh, I think you have, who among you have a grandfather, grandmother who has now an Alzheimer's disease, who can't remember things, no? Can't remember in detail. Even us, actually, we tend to forget some things, the not so very important things that we are not geared to remember, we forget, no? So it calls us into mind that it makes us question, why can't one remember everything? It's not, you can't even remember the day you were born. No, scientists say that there is a I think it was 3 years or 3 months that you cannot remember anything from the day of your birth, no, up until 3 months. You cannot, there are things that you will really forget about. So why is it like this, there are also other mysteries that if this is the case, how does one learn? So how do we learn? We're in the university. How do we learn? What are the mechanisms that the mind plays on us, or how does one continue to learn? How does one integrate the new knowledge that he has into the past knowledge that he had? So there's also other questions like why do we behave in ways that we are not aware of? No, sometimes you're not aware that when you become a person who's accustomed to scratching your hair like that, or doing such maneuvers as getting your hair organized always in a certain way, it becomes second nature to you. You don't think of it already consciously. You just, in the class, you just make that gesture, and it becomes your behavior. But you didn't think about it, right? So there are instances that these are the things that happen in our behavior. We behave in this way. So these are the mysteries of the mind that leads us to the study of this topic or this subject. No? When we say psychology, it is actually taken from two words. Um, these words are psyche, which means in Greek soul, and logia or ology, which means study of. You encounter this term in a lot of subjects that you have, sociology, biology. So when we say psychology, psyche actually means soul in Greek. So why soul? Because um, early thinkers, who would like to study psychology, believe that the way we're thinking or the way we behave is actually a part or a product of our soul. This was the time that people really believed in the soul, or there is a soul that resides in the physical body. Why psyche? Psychic is actually a Greek mythological um, person, a Greek mythological being. She was the wife of Cupid. Psyche has become the wife of Cupid. Now there are details in the story. The most important thing to know is that Psyche had his husband, um, against the will of the mother of Cupid, which is Aphrodite. However, Psyche eventually won over the god love, Eros, and that's how Greeks came to name Psyche as soul. The soul is actually something that perseveres within the self. No, it's the soul. No, even if you die, if you have a soul, your soul continues, meaning your spirit continues. However, there are still distinctions from these two terms, soul and spirit. So basically, it's a study of the soul. But in the modern times, when we say psyche, it's actually referring to the way we think. For the modern times, where when you hear the word or the term psyche, it's referring to how one thinks, how one thinks with his mind. So the meaning of psychology is conventionally the scientific study of the mind. So you'll be wondering why soul and why scientific study. So scientific study of the mind because there are processes to be followed when a person or a scientist studies the mind. If you don't follow these processes, then your findings may be irrational, may be unreliable. So you cannot base your claims on your studies. It also means the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So what are mental processes? We'll actually be discussing that on later lessons and later slides. So when we talk about psychology, it also affects our lives through its influence on laws and public policy. It's not just studying the mind for the sake of studying the mind. So how can psychology help us? Psychology helps us through the application of the theories of psychology. So psychological researches and research, psychological theories and research influenced laws dealing with discrimination, capital punishment, courtroom practices, pornography, sexual behavior, and personal responsibility for actions. So, if you look into society, there's this there's this prevalence of addiction. Now, addiction is not actually just a state of your body, although it has its root in the body, but it also has its roots on how you came to addiction, right? So, when a person is addicted, it's not just the body that changes him. No? Let's say, for example, a person became addicted to methamphetamine. So that's shabu, no, in terms of layman's term. So it's not just one-time addiction. There are series of processes that the person experienced. No, maybe he was depressed in his family. No, that he turned against this conventional, typical role as a child. He went black sheep. He rebelled, and in rebelling, he also found addiction or the use of addictive drugs as a way of expressing himself, of going out from that suppressed and oppressed point that he is in. So uh, this clearly affects public policy. That's why when we talk about laws, no, when a person is branded as has connections in relation to the use of illegal drugs such as methamphetamine or shabu, um, in the law there are categorizations. Um, how can you categorize somebody who is just using and somebody who is selling shabu? And if we categorize that, there are also differences in the punishments that the courts will apply to the certain person in question. That's why it says that psychology is not just a study of the human mind and our behavior. It influences our laws, and therefore it influences how our society is ordered and how we do about with our everyday lives in the society that we live in. So there are also other benefits, no, in exploring psychology. So when um, when we study psychology, it will actually help us learn about ourselves. No? I know you have a subject understanding the self. Actually, most of the theories or discussions on understanding the self is grounded on psychology. However, we will deviate from the understanding the self. We will not just understand yourself, but we will also examine how psychology, how the self, in relation to society, is operating. Uh, Um, Number one, it will help you learn about yourself, the way you talk, the way you behave. Number two, you can also learn how to critically think. No, it's because in psychology there's a term that we say metacognition. When we say metacognition, it's actually the study of it's actually a topic that is grounded on the study of how one thinks. No, it's called thinking about thinking or learning about learning. When we say cognition, it's a mental process, no, of the mind. So when we say metacognition, there is the element of the mind thinking about how he thinks. So you are trained to become critical in the field of psychology. You can also learn communication skills. So discussing about psychology and tailoring for the benefit of everybody, the psychology, the complex behaviors can create in us skills that we can use in order to effectively communicate. We can also understand the complex factors of behavior. How does one behave? Why does one behave like the way he behaves? No? We can also appreciate the individual vis-a-vis the environment. So we can look at society not just as groups. Society is not just a bunch of groups, no, talking about each other. That this is how we order things. No, this is how We classify things. This is how we do things. It's not just groups. It's also the individual and how he thinks. Okay? So those are some of the benefits of learning psychology. When we talk about psychology, there are central questions that we should bear in mind. So what are these central questions? When we talk about central questions, these are the perennial or the continuing questions. These are questions which are not 100% answered by any one perspective of psychology or any kind of psychological study, no? So there are central questions where the study of psychology revolves around. Number one, we talk about nature versus nurture. So the questions on this category would say that would ask, no, when a person who studies psychology would ask, are genes or the environment, no, the most influential thing in determining the behavior of individuals and in accounting for differences among people. So when we talk about nature and nurture, and you can encounter this concept on a lot of social science subjects, no, it's actually talking about how a person behaves and how he came to behave like that, no. If a person is stubborn, how did he become stubborn? Why is he stubborn? Why does he talk back to his parents, no? Is it because in the genes they have internally um, developed in the genes? Maybe his father was had this kind of behavior also long ago, no. There's also another question battling that question. Are you sure that it's a gene, or is it the kind of environment where the person living in vastly influences that person? In a household, no, how does the father behave? That's part of nurture. So psychology would like to ask the which of these, no, nature versus nurture, weighs, no, a lot more. So that's one central question. And the other is also about free will versus determinism. When we talk about free will, what is it? Free will is actually the ability to think for ourselves, no. In the biblical story, we were given our own free will. By it is implied that we were given our own free will, no, by God. When Adam and Eve um, partook the fruit of the tree of uh, knowledge, so we were given a choice. Is it to think for ourselves or to just accept the fate, no, that we have? So in terms of free will versus determinism, we are actually encountering questions like, are we the products of our environment, guided only by the forces that are out of our control, or are we able to choose the behaviors we engage in? If we become violent to a person, example your seatmate or your friend, if you become violent, no, suddenly with no reason, is it because you chose that, or is it because your nature, no, chose that for you as a behavior, no? So if that is so, then how can we attach responsibility? If you punched your seatmate or your classmate or the person you are angry, your behavior, was that your choice, free will, or was that influenced by the forces that you are encountering every day, no? That's what questions. That's one of the central questions in psychology: free will versus determinism. Other questions also center on conscious versus unconscious processing. So when we talk about this kind of central question, it actually explores to what extent are we conscious of our own actions and the causes of them. When we talk back in a loud voice, no, when we talk back in a loud voice, diba? Sometimes people who don't really know you, especially those who are listening, who are being branded as, oh, she's so maldita, or he's so maisog, no? He's grumpy, or she's annoying, no? When we become annoying in the eyes of others, are we thinking to be annoying? Hmm? Are we Do we really intend to be annoying, or is it just unconsciously manifesting? I know of some people who actually would talk back in a loud voice, no, and they would say, "I'm not shouting. I'm not, I'm not angry. This is just the way I talk." Unconsciously, they talk like that. So that is also one uh, central question of psychology. Are our behaviors conscious, or some of it are unconscious? What is unconscious? No? So these are the things that we will explore. So there are also differences versus similarities. Now, we would also like to ask, to what extent are we all similar, and to what extent are we different? When we're all people, no, we're all just people, some males, some females. Are we all similar? How is it that personality differs per person? No, in a community where you are given the similar circumstances, but there are still differences. And in the differences, how are we similar? How are personalities similar? Why is your friend, one of your friends, um, a happy person, gleeful person, but one of your friends is a gloomy person? And how do they interact? But there are also similarities with them. They are both male, say for example. So what are these? No, what are these? What are the truths that lie on these questions? There's also questions regarding accuracy versus inaccuracy. So to what extent are humans good information processors? Can we really trust our minds? No? When a person um, who testifies in court that uh, um, he is actually saying something, no, to the disadvantage of the accused. When a person is blurting out information, how reliable do you think are these testimonies? when when on some part of our brain we can experience hallucinations, we can experience disorderliness of our mental processes, no? These are the questions that are very important in the study of psychology. So for that, we go to how psychology originated. Actually, the first and foremost, and the very catalyst of why psychology became as is, it's because there were thinkers, no? There were great philosophers. I don't know if you have encountered these people on your other subjects on social science, but there were great philosophers. I think in understanding the self, you will encounter these people. So long ago, in the time of Alexander, the Roman Empire, and the Greek high culture, no, there were great philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. So they pose questions like, what is consciousness? How does one think the way one thinks? So, are people really rational? Do all people think the same? Are the mental processes of people the same? No, because we're all people. Even though we have difference in gender, are our mental capabilities the same? No? So there are a lot of questions that these think, because their job was thinking. So these thinkers were asking about. So is there really such thing as free choice? If that's the case, no? So what did these great philosophers do? They questioned the distinction between nature and nurture. So and of course the existence of free will. So we discussed what free will a while ago. Uh, Plato argued on the nature side. He believes that certain kinds of knowledge are innate or inborn. That we are born with our behaviors, we are born with our preferences, we are born with our knowledge, no? Whereas the other person, Aristotle, was more on the nurture side. Aristotle is actually interested in what he calls reality, no? So in the physical world, he was more on the nurture side. He believes that each child is born as an empty state, or a tabula rasa. No, it has no experience. Therefore, whatever experience that he gains is collected, and it becomes the part of the personality and the intellect of that person. So what do you think? What do you think? Which do you think among these philosophers have a sounder or more sound explanation. No? So what do you think? Of course, these are the sources of why people started to question how people think. So in the development in the modern era, um, the study of psychology has been formalized. So the philosophers were not very formal about it, especially that the way they studied the mind was through discourse, asking each other, testing that idea of each other. However, uh, in the turn of the century, in the modern era, so we encountered a more formal type of psychology. These are the origins of the psychology that we uh, we study right now. So it started with Wilhelm Wundt and Edward Titchener. Their psychology was called structuralism. They called it structuralism. The goal was to identify basic elements of structures or psychological experience. So what they do, so structuralists use the method of introspection. What is introspection? They use introspection to attempt to create a map of elements of consciousness. Example, the psychologist would sit and try to think happy thoughts. So, in thinking about happy thoughts, actually, it's not just happy thoughts. There are steps in how you arrive at the happy thoughts that you have. Sometimes the happy thought that you are thinking comes from memory. Sometimes the happy thought you're thinking comes from your dream. So, those are the structures. When you say structuralism, Wilhelm Wundt and their school, they tried to structure these things. So they attempted to create a map of elements of the consciousness. So when you do introspection, it involves asking research participants to describe exactly what they experience as they work on mental tasks, such as viewing colors, reading a page in a book, or performing a math problem. So structuralism actually wanted to map out the processes of psychology. After that, because introspection was really the game during that uh, during that period, um, people uh, turned to be skeptical of skepticism, of introspection. They started to question, is it really the correct scientific way to study how mind thinks? Is it just because we're thinking and describing this is all? So uh, those questions arrived, and it bloomed into functionalism. So William James was the progenitor of functionalism. So what was functionalism? It was to understand why animals and humans have developed the mental processes that they currently possess. How? It actually studies how the mind works to enable an organism to adapt to and function in its environment. So he looked, or William James looked into how a person or an organism thinks in the way that is in his natural environment. So if a person behaves this way, uh, is it because he is expected to perform a function in society? If a person behaves in a certain manner that is what we call high behavior, like such high etiquette, is it because he's thinking really uh, about that, he consciously wanted to behave like that, or it's just because the society or the nature commands him to do that? So James and the other members of the functionist school were influenced by Charles Darwin. So take note that functionalism, especially William James, were influenced by Charles Darwin. Who is Charles Darwin? Who developed the theory of natural selection and evolution. So Darwin proposed that the physical characteristics of animals and humans evolved because they were useful or functional. Example, in biology, there's a theory that the thumb developed later because its function, this thumb, developed later because its function was actually to help the people grab things, especially things. No? So the functionalists believe that Darwin's theory also applied to psychological characteristics. So, example, if a person is aggressive, a person has a personality which we can call aggressive, it's because it has a function to him. No? Because the aggression may put the person in a state of power. It's maybe because that's his defense mechanism to express his unwanted or his suppressed behavior, suppressed desires, suppressed ideas. So this is now the uh, idea of functionalism. So what's the difference? What the difference between structuralism and functionalism? Okay, so there are many differences. Now, from those two schools actually came about other contemporary psychological perspectives. So from structuralism, who are concerned on structuring how the mind works, to functionalism, who's concerned on describing or studying how the behavior functions or how the mental process that is being discussed operates. There also sprung a lot of psychological perspectives. This is the one that we're talking about in the outcomes, no? In the earlier slides. So these are the perspectives when we study psychology. So after structuralism and functionalism came about Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic. When we say psychoanalytic, it's actually understanding that behavior is in terms of unconscious motives stemming from sexual and aggressive impulses. Any behavior that we do, especially those that we do not think about, no, uh, we are doing because there are suppressed behaviors that we're trying to suppress. So that's psychoanalytic or psychodynamic. Please remember that psychological perspective. We also have the biological one. So it's an orientation towards understanding the neurobiological processes that underlie behavior and mental processes. So the psychologist who would like or who studies the biological perspective, actually they study what is the connection of the anatomy of the body of the organism. Let's say, for example, the person, no, the body. So, what are the anatomies or the operations in his body that comes about, and how does it influence our behavior? So, you'll just remember that when we say biological perspective, the behavior it describes that the behavior is actually grounded upon the chemical, anatomical, the physical operations that are happening within the body. Let's say, for example, the person uh, who is aggressive is just reacting to the hot weather. No, there those kinds of reasons to behavior is actually a part of the biological perspective. So when we talk about cognitive, people like Jean Piaget are the heavy hitters in this field. So in the cognitive perspective, the understanding of psychology is actually geared towards the questions on how do we perceive things, how do we remember things, how do we create our ideas, how do we decide, how do we solve problems in our minds. Those are the things that happen in the mind if you will be looking at psychology in a cognitive perspective. When we talk about behavioral, these are actually on the learning side of things, excuse me. So, the heavy hitters here are Ivan Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, John Watson. When we talk about behavioral perspective, it's actually they actually look at psychology as an orientation towards understanding observable behavior in terms of conditioning and reinforcement. These two terms are very important. When we talk about conditioning and reinforcement, it means that our behavior is actually reinforced, meaning there's a positive reward or negative punishment that we're doing to our behavior. No, um, That's why we are behaving such. Let's say, for example, if some of your friends are unruly, you cannot tell them to stop yelling, to they're very wacky, they would like to be heard always. It's actually because in the past, according to behavioral perspective, in the past, these behaviors were reinforced. They were given a positive, like example, when they acted like this, they were given candy, because the parents were enjoying, the jolliness of this person. So it reinforces the behavior. So that's what you call behavioral perspective. In the subjectivist perspective, there's an orientation towards understanding the behavior and mental processes in terms of the subjectivities or the subjective realities people actively construct. So when we talk about subjective realities, it means that every person has his or her own reality. So when we talk about the example a while ago, earlier, on the first slide or the earlier slides on John Nash, we can say that experience really is subjective. One person may experience the graduation, let's say for example, the graduation event on a different reality. The other person may experience on a different reality. That's why when subjectivists study the mind, they pin down the reality of the person that they're studying. So they do not make generalization, sweeping generalization. What they really want is the particular experience of the person. Like, so for example, John Nash, he was a Nobel Prize, but he had this very queer or awkward experience when it comes to his view of reality. So what are these? All these, or the analysis of psychological phenomena, can be approached from several different perspectives, as what we have discussed. So each perspective offers somewhat a different account of why individuals act as they do, and each can make a contribution to our concept of the total person. So I'll give you an example here. So when you look at this, can somebody please read? Thank you for reading. Now, if you look at this, there are differences. Differences on the way we explain things, in terms of perspective. So from a biological perspective, so there is a difference to the behavioral perspective. So as you see in the behavior, somebody punches someone in the face, the biological perspective would view it like, because it's there are brain areas that are activated, firing the nerves. Biological, the anatomy, the explanation is from the anatomy. However, for the behavioral perspective, they would look at it as a stimulus and response. They would say that he punched that guy because there was a stimulus, and the stimulus was that he pinched the nose, and the stimulus with which you respond by punching. So it was a learned response, probably because in the when he was young, very young, he also punched the neighbor's kid, and that for him was a release, a release of this, a justified response. So when he grew up, he learned this behavior. So that's the behavioral perspective. However, the cognitive perspective would also say that no, there is a mental processes. So there is actually an explanation to that punch in terms of how, or the goals and plans of the one punching the other person. So the goal was to defend the concept of honor. So in the cognitive perspective, they have these concepts like honor, freedom. So these concepts are very real to the person, right? Who among you here really believe in the idea of love? Love cannot be touched, right? Hatred cannot be touched. Anger cannot be touched. But they are manifestation. Now, in the cognitive perspective, the person punching the other would really be explained that the goal was to defend the person's concept of honor. Maybe because he was dishonored, and the aggressive behavior was his way to solving the problem, no? That uh, in other ways would tarnish the honor of the person. So, from a psychoanalytic perspective, that action differs in explanation. It can be explained from this another perspective, that the one person who punched the other is really expressing his unconscious aggressive instinct, because in the psychoanalytic perspective it says that all of us have our aggression in us. So maybe he cannot contain this aggression anymore. He punched the person in the face. So that's from the psychoanalytic perspective, no? And finally, from the subjective perspective, your aggressive act can be understood as a reaction to interpreting the person's utterance as a personal insult. So there is a similarity maybe in the cognitive and subjectivist perspective, but I would like to state to everybody that when we talk about the subjective perspective, here comes the integration of societal concerns, like example, the concept of insult, the actions of people. These are part of psychology already. So it's very subjective na, no? So these are how we interpret psychology, our behaviors in terms of psychological perspectives. Now, I hope you understand, because psychology also has major fields. This is just a rundown, no? So why are we talking about the major fields of psychology? Now, the analysis of psychological phenomena can be approached from several perspectives, just what we discussed on the previous slide. Now, each offers a somewhat different account, no? So there are differences, no, on how we treat people and the way they think, the way they behave. Now, in concept, psychology now, if there are different perspectives, it can expand to different professions. It can expand to different focuses. So now we're talking about the major subfields of psychology. So what people, or what kind of professions or people are using psychology, and how do they use it? We have actually different subfields. One is biological psychology. So in biological psychology, we explain behavior according to the physical, no, processes, operations. We also have cognitive psychology, developmental psychology. So when we talk about developmental psychology, this is the psychology that is geared towards societal development. In many humanitarian groups or movements such as UNICEF, UNESCO, they practice, actually they have psychologists, and these psychologists research the psychology of people. Example, in the time of Yolanda, there were people who were psychosocially affected. So in developmental psychology seeks to help, no, these people. And also in developmental psychology, there are different, no, aspects, because when we talk about development, it's actually societal. So when developmental psychologists study, no, the person, they study it uh, because they want, uh, their goal is to have genuine development where people actually are seen, no? So we also have social and personality psychology. Sometimes when you take tests on personality, especially when you take the entrance exam, or civil service examination, you take a neuropsychological test. This is in the realm of social and personality psychology. We assess, social and personality psychologists assess people based on their personalities and how do they fit on groups and organization. We also have clinical and counseling psychology. When we talk about clinical and counseling psychology, we're talking about people or professionals who are studying the mind of people who have disorders. No, these are clinical. There's the connection also here of anatomy, medicine. Okay, so for the betterment of the patient. We also have school and educational psychology. Actually, in school, psychological theories are really the fundamental, no, fundamental theories that educators study, because this is where learning comes, thinking comes, no, and all those processes. Organizational and engineering psychology. Do you think you may be wondering, why is there engineering psychology? Do you know that uh, how buildings and structures also affect the way we think? Yeah. So, I'll be giving an example to you. An example of that is, why do you think there are more restaurants who, which color their structures with red? So that's on psychology, because red actually is the spectrum of the color which influence the mind to be hungry or to be passionate, no, because in the mind we already have associations with the color red. Okay, so we also do so if there are different kinds, no, of subfields, then how do psychologists study the mind? Simple, just using the scientific method. So the use of scientific method, it is used by psychologists, no. Now, when we research in psychology, it's always there will be generating hypotheses. I know you have encountered this already in your other subjects, especially in research. So can you explain what a hypothesis is, and why is it important that when studying psychology we have research questions? Anybody? So yes, generating hypotheses through formulating research question and looking for theories. What is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a statement can be tested, no? So these steps are in psychology. So when we study something, it's not just that because we want to study. No, there are hypotheses, there are theories that we would like to experiment. That the second one. Now, experiments provide the strongest test of hypothesis. Let's say, for example, the hypothesis is that a dog who will be called using a bell, ding 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 ding, the bell, a dog who will be called using a bell and giving it a treat, no, after you have called it with a bell, would associate the ringing of the bell with giving of treats. So they would respond really, even if there are no bells around, you're not calling them. When they hear something, the stimulus, when they hear the bell, they would respond to it because it was a learned behavior and it was reinforced. So there are experiments. That's one of the hypotheses. Now you would like to test that. You will be testing that using the experiment. You'll test that with your cat. And then after that you will relate, no? You do the correlation. What's the correlation? Now, in psychology or in other fields, it's not actually that anything that uh, anything that is significantly related to a variable is not actually the cause of that. So correlation is not causation. Let's say, for example, the you would say the dog is salivating because the bell rang. Yes, it may be true, but it is just because the correlation. We cannot establish a truth that the salivation is caused by the bell. So it's a topic like that. So all our theories, oh, not all, but most of the theories are grounded on correlational studies. You will encounter this on different subjects. We also in psychology observe, no? Um, we observe the behavior of people through direct observation. The scientist studies the behavior uh, through a group or using a survey instrument through the survey method, or they can also study the case history. What are the histories, no? So what is the history of this patient? So it's like that. Psychologists also study from literature reviews. So a person or a psychologist can study the schizophrenic or a person, his way of thinking through reading his medical accounts. That's narrative reviews and analyzing, also meta-analysis. So now it brings us to question, sir, is it right that we experiment on people? No, is it right? Is it right to treat us as guinea pigs? These are the ethics in researching in psychology. The two most important things that you remember is, if you're researching in psychology, you should secure an informed consent on the person you're studying, and also you should consider the right to privacy. That's why when you see psychological papers, they will really look into agreements, no, that says that um, we will not disclose your data, your name will become anonymous because it can harm the person you're studying. How does it harm? How? How can a person can be harmed by your research? So, sir, does this apply to animals? Yes. So, today, there are any painful or harmful procedures imposing animals must be thoroughly justified. So, in terms of the knowledge to be gained from the study. What do we mean by this? So, there should be a serious justification that we are dissecting an octopus or a creature, no, for the purpose of scientific advancement. So it's not just, because I want to do this. No, it's not ethical. So researchers have a moral obligation to treat animals humanely. Why? Because psychologists are now beginning to uh, uncover that animals have their own personalities and individual responses. Some even point out that the octopus is actually a conscious being. No? So it's like a person already. So these are the ethics that you should consider if you're trying to experiment with animals. So, what is ethical research? It is also a central principle of research ethics. Is that those who participate in psychology studies should be considered full partners. So if you're studying psychology, they are not just your respondents. They are your partners. Okay? So again, when we talk about scientific study of psychology, we follow the steps. Follow the steps. What are these steps? Problem identification, data collection in relation to the problem that you're asking. You prepare your instruments for data collection, and you organize the data, and also based on the data you arrive at your conclusion. So this is just simplistic, but when you apply this to really hardcore psychology, there are a lot to consider. Now I would like to give you these terminologies. So now these are just terminologies that are important when we're studying psychology, no? Especially that we have hypothesis. It's a statement about the cause and effect that can be tested. The experiment, it's a well-controlled test of a hypothesis about cause and effect. It's how you interact with your variables. When we talk about variables, something that can occur with different values that can be measured. Example, you're studying personality in relation to aggression. So who are more aggressive, introverts or extroverts? Your variable now is in response, introversion or extroversion. No? So these are the things that you consider, in your experiment. Now, on the variables, there are different variables. Independent variables, you can read it also there. And you have dependent variables. The only difference is an independent variable is a variable which cannot be controlled, while a dependent variable depends on other variables and it changes, while other variables changes. We also have terms like experimental group and control group, and random assignment, measurement, very important. talk about random assignment, this is establishing credibility in your population. And measurement, it's a system for assigning numbers to different values, statistics, mathematical techniques. No? Okay, so those are, we covered the three outcomes. No? We discussed number one, the brief history. We also discussed the different perspectives, and we also discussed the terminologies and also how the psychologists how the psychologists create research or do the researches or create knowledge. So for this one, I would like you to review. Huh? And for the learning task, um, I would like you to explain something. On a 1/2 sheet of yellow paper, answer the following. Given the definition of the concept of psychology, discuss the use of psychology in your profession. Example, if you will be becoming a person who is connected to your profession that you're taking right now. No? And number two, explain in one paragraph the difference of the contemporary psychological perspectives. So please refrain from using the example that I presented in the earlier slide. Create your own and think about your own. So those are your learning. This is the learning task 1.1, which you will be submitting in the next face-to-face class. So for that, we finish our discussion on the overview of psychology. See you next session.